So I don't know if you heard, but Neil Young and other musicians have kind of spoke out and saying they're going to leave the platform because Joe Rogan is allowed to be on this platform having these kinds of conversations with the likes of Robert Malone. And it's clear to me that Spotify and YouTube are being significantly influenced by these extreme voices, like you mentioned, on each side. And it's also clear to me that Facebook is the same, and it was going back and forth. In fact, that's why Facebook has been oscillating on the censorship. Is like one group gets louder than the other, depending on whether it's an election year. There's several things to say here. So one, it does seem, I think you put it really well, it would be amazing if these platforms could find mechanisms to listen to the center, to the big center that's actually going to be affected by the results of our pursuit of scientific truth, right? And listen to those voices. I also believe that most people are intelligent enough to process information and to make up their own minds. Like they're not, in terms of, it's complicated, of course, because we've just been talking about advertisement and how people can be influenced. But I feel like if you have raw, long form podcasts or programs where people express their mind and express their argument in full, I think people can hear it to make up their own mind. And if those arguments have a platform on which they can live, then other people could provide better arguments if they disagree with it. And now we as human beings, as rational, as intelligent human beings, can look at both and make up our own minds. And that's where social media can be very good at, like this collective intelligence. We together listen to all of these voices and make up our own mind. Humble ourselves, actually, often. You think like you're an expert, say you have a PhD in a certain thing, so there's this confidence that comes with that. And the collective intelligence, uncensored, allows you to humble yourself eventually. Like as you discover, all it takes is a few times, looking back 5 years later, realizing I was wrong. And that's really healthy for a scientist. That's really healthy for anybody to go through. And only through having that open discourse can you really have that. That said, Spotify also, just like Pfizer, is a company, which is why this podcast, I don't know if you know what RSS feeds are, but podcasts can't be censored. So Joe's in the unfortunate position he only lives on Spotify. So Spotify has been actually very good at saying we're staying out of it for now. But RSS, this is pirate radio. Nobody can censor it. It's the internet. So financially, in terms of platforms, this cannot be censored, which is why podcasts are really beautiful. And so if Spotify or YouTube wants to be the host of podcasts, I think where they flourish is free expression, no matter how crazy.
Yes, but I do want to push back a little bit on what you're saying. Because I have anti-vax friends who I love. I mean, they're dear, cherished friends. And they'll send me stuff. And it'll take me an hour to go through what they sent to see if it is credible. And usually it's not. It's not a random sample of the anti-vax argument. I'm not saying I can disprove the anti-vax argument, but I am saying that it's almost like we were talking about how medical science, clinical trials, the presentation of clinical trials to physicians could be improved. And the first thing we came up with is to have pre-publication transparency in the peer review process.
Yes.
So bad information, biased information doesn't get out as if it's legitimate and you can't put it back, recapture it once it gets out. I think there's an element of that in the arguments that are going on about vaccines, and they're on both sides, but I think the anti-vax side puts out more units of information claiming to show that the vaccines don't work. And I guess in an ideal situation, there would be real-time fact-checking by independent people, not to censor it, but to just say that study was set up to do this, and this is what the conclusions were. So the way it was stated is on one side of this argument.
But that's what I'm arguing. Yeah, I agree with you. What I'm arguing is that this big network of humans that we have, that is the collective intelligence, can't do that real time if you allow it to, if you encourage people to do it. And the scientists, as opposed to, listen, I interact with a lot of colleagues, a lot of friends that are scientists, they roll their eyes. Their response is like, ugh, like they don't want to interact with this. But that's just not the right response. When a huge number of people believe this, it is your job as communicators to defend your ideas. It is no longer the case that you go to a conference and defend your ideas to two other nerds that have been working on the same problem forever. I mean, sure, you can do that, but then you're rejecting the responsibility you have explicitly or implicitly accepted when you go into this field, that you will defend the ideas of truth. And the way to defend them is in the open battlefield of ideas and to become a better communicator. And I believe that when you have a large, you said you invested 1 or 2 hours in this particular, but that's little ants interacting at scale. I think that allows us to progress towards truth. At least I hope so.
I think you're an optimist. I want to work with you a little bit on this. Let's say a person like Joe Rogan, who, by the way, had me on his podcast and let me...
It's an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I did too. And I didn't know Joe. I didn't know much about his podcast.
And you pushed back on Joe a bunch, which is great.
And he was,
I love it.
He was a gentleman, and we had it out. In fact, he put one clip. At one point, he said something that was a little bit wrong, and I corrected him. And he had the guy Jamie. He had Jamie check it and was very forthright in saying, yeah, John got it right here. We got to modify this a little bit. In any event.
You got him.
Well, I wasn't trying to get him.
You totally. There's a beautiful exchange. There's so much respect in the room, pushing back and forth. It was great.
Yeah. So I respect him. And I think when he has somebody on who's a dyed-in-the-wool anti-vaxxer, the question is, how can you balance, if it needs balance, in real time? I'm not talking about afterwards. Mm-hmm. I'm talking in real time. Maybe you record, well, he does record it, obviously, but maybe when there's a statement made that is made as if it's fact-based, maybe that statement should be checked by some folks imaginary folks who are trustworthy. And in real time, as that discussion is being played on the podcast, to show what independent experts say about that claim.